Hello and welcome to this demonstration video on WordGraph. Before going to the demonstration, we will start with an introduction and some key definitions. WordGraph is a Python package for reconstructing causal graphical models from text data. To do so, we follow four main steps. First, we collect data by fetching documents remotely or by local loading. Then we clean the data, tokenize and weight it to get document term matrix that contains the documents in rows and terms in columns. Second, we get a copartition that organizes the matrix into homogeneous blocks of documents and terms. And finally, we generate graphical models based on the most representative terms of each block, typically the most frequent ones, in order to explore words interactions and ultimately obtain topic summaries. We obtain the copartitions with a co-clustering approach that simultaneously organizes data's rows and columns into homogeneous blocks. These types of approach has been shown to be particularly suited for textual data that are typically sparse, high-dimensional, and usually imbalanced. In particular, co-clustering is more effective than one-sided clustering on such data. So, after pre-processing, vectorizing, and data weighting to enhance discriminative elements, we get a matrix which contains at each entry a value that quantifies the presence of a word in a document. In short, the objective of diagonal co-clustering is to learn the Z and W matrices that correspond to the assignments of documents and words respectively to each co-cluster. In order to perform co-clustering, WordGraph uses the coclust package, which is a well-known reference for data co-clustering, and it has three implementations corresponding to different co-clustering approaches. For instance, modularity, information theoretic, or model-based probabilistic methods. In WordGraph, we use coclust mode, which has been shown that usually obtains the best performances with textual data. The goal is to maximize modularity, which corresponds to this formula, and that allows us to find the affectation matrices Z and W, which we presented previously. In our experimentations, we use the well-known PubMed 10 benchmark dataset, which is a collection of 15,000 scientific papers about 10 diseases. Let's see how co-clustering helps us to handle and interpret them. Once documents grouped into co-clusters, we can extract the top terms from each topic. Here's an example of the first 5 diseases. For example, in IMD, which is age macular degeneration, we find the following most representative terms: macular, diabetic, edema, etc. This list of terms helps us to find an idea on the topic within a co-cluster. Yet, a list of top terms is not sufficient. If we have lots of documents and we want to understand topics in depth, it is necessary to go deeper and identify the direct relationships between top terms. Most importantly, discovering causality between them would be a valuable information of how they relate to each other. And this can be achieved by reconstructing causal graphical models based on word representations that are extracted from document term matrix. To achieve this, we use the MEEK-R package, which is a hybrid network reconstruction approach based on a robust constraint-based method. In particular, MEEK takes advantage of 2- and 3-point conditional mutual information scores. The idea is to find a graph G that describes the best data D. So I have to find the joint distribution of all variables by maximizing this log likelihood formula, where n is the number of documents and xi are the words. And this likelihood uses conditional cross-entropy H, for which we recall below the formula for one variable. Other information theoretic measures, such as mutual information, are also given below. Corpus vocabulary can reach size of tens of thousands words. Thus, exploring topics and subtopics from the whole vocabulary at once is infeasible in practice. Hence, co-clustering is of great help as it can first segment the documents and words following main topics before exploring how words relate together within each co-cluster. In other words, combining an efficient co-clustering approach and the robust graph reconstruction method appears as a natural solution for exploring a corpus. So, after this introduction and definitions, let's see what WordGraph package actually is. WordGraph is the first Python package based on Make for reconstruction and visualization of word graphical models. It follows the pipeline that we described previously. The graphs generated are interactive and customizable. It proposes 3 different usage levels depending on users' needs. And now let's switch to the demonstration to see them. It is worth noting that the application is fully Dockerized. The image was already built, and now let's launch the container which loads a web application and the Jupyter notebook that we will use later. The first usage of WordGraph is a web application encapsulating all the pipeline we described previously. This is how the web application looks like. We designed the interface to be used in a biomedical context using PubMed API. It is a default proposal that can be easily enhanced with other APIs or simply by loading data locally. Let's start by typing a search query using PubMed search engine, for example, COVID, and the number of documents to be retrieved. We then choose the co-clustering parameters, starting with the number of co-clusters and the number of top terms to be selected to reconstruct the graph. And then we start the co-clustering. Since the download could take some time, we will accelerate the video a bit to go directly to the results. Once finished, the co-clusters top terms are automatically plotted to help us identifying high-level topics of each co-cluster. Let's focus on the third co-cluster, for example, which has interesting top terms like vaccine, anxiety, and mental. We have the possibility to change the MIC parameters. So for example, let's modify the number of shuffles, which is the parameter that allows MIC to compute an empirical p-value that helps to establish the existence probability of network edges. Once the graph reconstructed, it will be automatically plotted. The graph generated is interactive, so the user can reorganize the nodes, obtain magnified views, etc. We can see interesting relations, for example, the anxiety and depression, which are the mental effects caused by the pandemic. And if we are interested in a node, for example, vaccine, we can click on it and build a secondary graph based on the most similar words within the co-cluster. Here, for example, the most similar words related to vaccine are booster and dose, and we also have some interesting relations like unvaccinated and hesitate, or also vaccine effects and studies related to it. And if you are interested in another co-cluster, we can clean the plotted graph and generate another from another co-cluster. Otherwise, we generate a new graph and keep the old one for comparison. This web application is built over a library that we developed which contains the core functionalities needed in WordGraph. Let's go back to the terminal and launch the Jupyter notebook that contains examples of usage. The functionalities are grouped under 4 modules: I/O, utils, WordGraph class, and visualization. We designed the library to be straightforward and easy to use. Here are some examples of usage which are also available on the GitHub repository we shared. After graph generation, all variables are stored inside the WordGraph object, which can be accessed and stored if needed. Here's an example of the graph summary. The last usage that we propose is a pre-built Jupyter Notebook pipeline using the WordGraph library, which we embedded in a single Jupyter Notebook cell through IPyWidgets elements. And if we run all cells, it is in fact the source from which the web application was built. The pipeline is fully customizable, so we can modify, add, or remove widgets and parameters easily. To conclude, we created WordGraph to provide an easy-to-use Python package for users willing to retrieve as much information as possible from various topic areas with only few clicks. We have made particular efforts in order to turn WordGraph into a standalone web application for users with no background in Python nor Jupyter Notebook, while still allowing for customizable interface. The pipeline embedded by WordGraph, based on co-clustering and MIC, gives valuable and coherent analysis while allowing to go in depth in subtopics discovery. The source code and Dockerized application are accessible from our GitHub. For future improvements of the package, we want to add more databases access, like news database, for example. And even if WordGraph is Dockerized, it will be more interesting to publish the solution in a website that we can host in our servers. This is the end of our presentation. We thank you for your attention.